morning, miners, and allow me to welcome you to TerrafirmaCrack Season 2. My name is Pakratt, and I'm giving you the tour of what we'll be going through today. Now, normally this would be the session where we show the very first recording session between me and my team for TerrafirmaCrack, as it is a team event. Unfortunately, my computer decided to eat my footage for day one, so I will instead be giving you the intro as to what the TerrafirmaCrack competition is, and what the actual mod itself is. I will also be giving you the links to the various people that are involved on my team, as well as the other teams, in order to make it so that you can actually see what actually happened on day one. The first thing I'll be going over is the actual competition itself, and what it actually means to you guys. The rules in place, and what it actually means. Now, the first thing to know is that TerrafirmaCrack is actually using the TerrafirmaCraft mod. This is a mod that is very significant changes to the game, and that is why I'll be going over a lot of that in the rest of this video. It adds a very interesting set of rule sets to the game which need to be followed, and brings things back to the basics, to everything, including everything from how to make your very first axe and felling your first tree to how ores are produced and found. The actual top tiers of materials are also completely different. For instance, diamonds do not do a dang thing. While they still exist, they do not produce tools. This and many other things make this a very interesting mod to use for a PvP competition. And while TerrafirmaCraft itself as a mod is used to be used in multiplayer, I do not know of any other competition that actually is designed to fit so many people over such a long period of time in such a significant way. Now, as far as what the actual competition is, what we actually have is we are going to have 4 teams, each consisting of 6 people, who will all be going into their own specific locations and doing the best they can for 2 complete in real life weeks to get themselves tiered up as high as possible with materials. And in the end, we will be all going against each other in a competition to see who actually wins. This year's competition is going to end in a fortress, in which all 4 teams will construct a fortress around spawn, and the leaders will stay in each of the fortresses, and the teams will go after each fortress. The team with the last surviving leader will win, as the leaders themselves will not be allowed to respawn. The only other rules that are in this game are the following. 1. On day 1, there will be no PvP or robbing or stealing of any kind. It is a non-aggression day, just to give us some time to establish ourselves. This only consists of day 1, as after the 24-hour period has passed, we are completely allowed to do anything that we need to do to each other. Everything including robbing, trading, raiding, or anything of the sort. There is no rules against any of this. 2. On the last day, there will be also a non-aggression pact, as in the last 24 hours we need time to build our fortresses, so we'll be having a non-aggression pack on that day as well. Outside of that, there is no non-aggressions, and anybody can do anything they want. This does not mean that you cannot have alliances. That is completely separate. 3. Beds are completely off limits. Because of the size and scope of these maps in TerrafirmaCraft, it is very difficult to go from spawn all the way back to wherever it is that your base is located. And in order to make the competition a little less annoying as far as that goes, we have made it so that even if a base is raided, the one thing they are not allowed to touch is the bed itself. You are now allowed to change how the spawn rates go inside that. Now, one thing worth noting right now is that the people that are involved in this are people that you might be familiar with and people that you might not be familiar with. And while it does say TerrafirmaCrack in the actual title of the competition, I am noted as the only person from Minecraft who is involved in it. And some people might wonder why this is still called a Minecraft type competition. Let me fully assure you, this was something that was this is a concept that was built by me and is run by me in a large portion of it. While Rayman and some of the other leaders do help out significantly with a lot of the concepts, it was my original concept that came up with it. And I designed this to be Minecraft in focus, as there is heavy PvP and very few rules involved, thus making it so that the competition itself is more about the interaction between people and the difficulty of the map and the mod itself, and not the rules that were put in place by the various mods. To me, this is what Minecraft is focused on in a lot of ways. It's more about the interaction between the community and between the competition than it is about the rules. And that is what makes it Minecraft to me, and that's what we're going to go with. So if you think that it shouldn't have the mindcrack name, tough noogies, it's going to be that way anyways. Now, while many of you, I'm sure, were hoping to see a lot of the other more famous names in this, I can assure you that if they could have, they would have. The problem is that the TerrafirmaCrack competition is over a 2-week period in which many of us have to make significant changes in our lives in order to make it so that we could take part in the competition. For instance, I had very few video uploads during this time period, mainly consisting of stuff left over from live streams that I still conducted every night. And if the people on the mindcrack server itself were to take part in it, they would also have to make significant changes to their video lineups in order to do this. It is understandably difficult for them to do that. It is also a very difficult mod to play if you do not understand it that well. So while it would have been nice to have a lot more people involved, it is understandably very difficult. And that pretty much does it for what the actual competition is itself. It's a very simple rule set, and it's a very simple concept in itself, so there is not a whole lot to say about it. So at this point, I'm going to do my best to make sure that I can tell YouTube to give you links to the various channels involved in this competition, in the boxes that I have in all the corners right now. If you wish to go to see any of these, please feel free to click the link, assuming I get this functioning properly. Okay, now the rest of this video is essentially going to consist of one thing. We're going to be talking about TerrafirmaCrack itself, the mod involved. Now it is to note that it is not the only mod in this, although it is not considered a mod pack. The only exception to that is that we do have Ray's minimap installed. Now, while this is not a mod pack and only one additional mod in there, it is worth noting. Because if you do go and get TerrafirmaCrack in order to copy us, Ray's minimap will not be installed by default. Also, it is worth noting that this is not the default texture pack. Kreicus, one of the developers for TerrafirmaCrack, has provided us with a texture pack that most of us use for the majority of the competition. But outside of that, this is pretty much as is, as most of the stuff is pretty much how you're going to find it if you download it yourself. Okay, now without further ado, let's go ahead and show you guys what this entire mod is about, as it has very significant changes between this and vanilla Minecraft. The first thing and the most basic thing to note in the game is the way you get the first basic tools. If you'll notice, there is a lot of various differences as what you can see in this game. For instance, the trees look completely different. There's actually about a dozen different types of trees in this mod. Possibly a little bit more, I don't remember off the top of my head. But each one has its own significant properties and its different features. For instance, some of them burn at higher temperatures than others, and some of them drop more wood than others. Some of them will drop saplings, some of them will not. For instance, the sequoia sapling. The sequoias themselves, while very large and very good for many different things, do not drop saplings. However, they will regrow on their own in their own biomes. Other examples are things like the Douglas fir, which can be used to farm stuff very easily. That would be ones like this one. You could set these up to be next to each other, and when you break one, you will break them all. Now, how will you get your basic tools? Please note there are no things like stone pickaxes in this mod. They simply do not exist, but there are stones all over the ground still. And this is how you get your first basic tools. Your first tool is going to be an axe, because if you take a look at the trees themselves cannot be punched. No matter what you do with your fist, you will not be able to break this log. Even if I sat here and punched this for the whole two minutes or so that it takes to get this log to take enough damage to break, it would end up not breaking, as they have designed it so that even punching a log will not break the log. And it doesn't even matter, because it is much easier to simply knap together your first materials. As you can see, by having more than 2 rocks in your inventory at a time and right-clicking on them in your hotbar, you will open up a knapping menu. This is a 5x5 interface that you will use to craft your first weapons and tools. When you do this, it is taking the same concept in the original Minecraft, and it is taking it to the next level. For instance, if we want to make an axe, we need to make an axe head. They have their own specific forms that you need to look up yourselves, but you can find them all on the wiki. Once you have your stone axe head, you can't then it is not possible to take this and then cut down the tree, as it is just a head. You can't do much with it. But how are you going to get wood if you can't break your first tree? Well, that's actually very simple. Or, I'm sorry, how are you going to get your first stick if you can't break your first tree? Well, it's very simple. The leaves themselves are where you get your sticks in this mod, not the logs. As you can see, when I broke some of these leaves, they dropped sticks. You take the stick, put it in your crafting bench in your inventory, and put it together with the tool head, and that is how you get your first tool. Now that I have an axe head, if we go up to this particular tree and start using on the bottom, it's actually doing damage. Now, when it does enough damage to take out the bottom block, it will break the entire tree, not just the bottom block. This is also a significant difference from the vanilla mod, or from vanilla Minecraft, as you don't have to actually break individual block. It is worth noting, however, that while you take out the single block at the bottom, the amount of damage done to the tool actually takes into account all the blocks being broken. For instance, while I did that much damage on that tree, if I come up to this here sequoia and do the same thing, it will do a significant more damage to the axe head. And in fact, the axe broke, and the whole tree did not break with it. It actually breaks the tree from the top down, so since they could not finish breaking the entire tree with the stone tool that I use, it only broke the top logs. As you can see, I did pick up a few that dropped to the side, but the majority of this tree does still remain. This is how the initial tools are crafted. Now, with stone tools, you can create things like axe heads, a shovel head, knives, a hoe, and a hammer. These are the only tools that you can actually create using the knapping system for stone. The only thing that you can do outside of knapping with the stones is create your initial weapon, which would be either the knife or javelins. Javelins are very helpful in the beginning of the game, as they are while they are a low damage weapon, they are one that you can both attack initial creatures with. For instance, these chickens right here, by hand, doing much more damage than you could do by punching, or by simply holding the right click button and throwing the javelin. Please note, when you kill things in this game, you do not, or when you kill the friendly mobs in this game, you do not receive the amount that you would normally get in vanilla. For instance, I killed one chicken and got 8 feathers. If I killed a cow, I would not get a single slab of meat. I would get more like a dozen slabs of meat. Same thing with this pig over here. As you can see, we received 12 raw pork chops and 1 rawhide from a single pig. Yes, that is right. Pigs also drop hides. This is actually what you use to make your leather materials, which we will look into later on. But we have raw pork chops, and as you can see, you cannot eat raw pork chops. You also cannot eat raw chicken. So how is it that you would get your first things to eat? Well, it is quite simple. Instead of having ovens in this game, seeing how you cannot actually mine stone in the beginning, we have fire pits. Now, in order to create a fire pit, you are going to need a fire starter, which is simply 2 sticks put in a horizontal row, or in a whatever you want to call that. The sticks themselves are what we are going to be using to create the fire. Simply take the 3 sticks and throw them on the ground. Then use your fire starter to light them. As you can see, they open their own GUI, which allows you to cook your food, and in order to make it so that you can eat it. Now, it does have a temperature gauge, and the higher this is, the faster it cooks. It is worth noting, however, that you cannot put stacks of materials inside the GUI for cooking items. You can only put 1 item at a time. Also, it is worth noting that some things cook that don't work in vanilla. For instance, eggs are a very good source of early meals, as eggs can be cooked and turned into fried eggs. The cooked egg or the fried egg is a very good early game item, as it is one of the only renewable resources that you can get in the beginning of the game for getting food. Also, it is worth noting that over here is where you would put your fuels. As I said, different trees can burn at different temperatures. If you look here, some will burn hotter than others, and it puts a significant portion on how high this bar will go when you put it in there. So finding the right trees for your fire pits is actually important. It is also worth noting that not only trees will burn in this mod. There is in fact a type of dirt called peat that you can get and harvest and use to cook with. It is actually found in the ground, and it is found all over the place. So now that we have our first tools and our first pieces of food to eat, you're probably wondering what those bars are in the bottom of the screen. There are actually two different bars here. One is for hunger, as you might expect. Now, it does not go down the same way that it goes down in vanilla. As you can see, me jumping around does not change that value very much. I could be running around all day and it will not change that. However, the blue bar is going down much faster. That is more of an equivalent of stamina, and it is something that is refilled by drinking water. Now, you actually can drink water multiple ways. For instance, you can go into any water source and it will refill that bar. The other way that you can refill your stamina bar is by using bottles of water, which you can use in all water source blocks. This is as simple as right-clicking on them and then right-clicking, and it will fill up a portion of your bar. You can simply make these by crafting them in a crafting bench, which you can then turn into, which you can get by cooking up 3 pieces of sand inside a fire pit. Or a forge, which we will get to later on. So now that we have food and we have water, you are probably wondering how it is that you can actually craft your first metal materials. Most of the tools in this game are made from metals. But seeing how you don't have a pick, how would you get down there? Well, it's actually quite simple. These rocks that we've been hitting this time actually will produce not just rocks. As you can see, sometime metal will show up in the spot instead. Now, these rocks actually have a specific purpose in telling you what's underneath them as well. Simply by finding metals on the surface means that there is metals underneath them as well. It's usually within about 25 blocks where it will spawn metals underneath them. So by finding copper, that means that there is copper underneath this point. So how would we actually get there since we can't actually make a pick? Well, these pieces of metal can actually be cooked into an ingot to make your first tool. There we go. Now that we have 16 of a material that was found on the ground, let's go ahead back to the fire pit and we will turn this into our first pick. It takes about 16 small pieces of material in order to make one ingot. Okay, now that we have our first 16 pieces of metal in order to craft our first ingot, in order to make our first pick, we are going to need a mold in order to put the ingot into. Now, in order to make a mold, we are going to need clay. Now, while clay generates a little bit differently in this mod, it is still possible to find it in the water. However, it is usually a little bit more difficult. On the other hand, it is often found on the shorelines themselves. As you can see, these zebra pattern type blocks are what clay actually forms as, and it is in much larger chunks than you find in vanilla. You can also find it not just by looking on the shorelines, but looking for the flowers that will spawn on top of the clay. These slight light orange colored flowers actually only spawn on clay, and that is their only purpose in the game. In fact, you cannot even collect them. They will break instantly. So let's go ahead and get a few pieces of clay so that we can make our first mold. Now that we have our clay, we're going to need our first crafting bench in order to turn it into a mold. Now, getting a crafting bench is a little bit more difficult in the game, as the logs do not actually turn into vanilla logs as you might expect. They don't turn into anything that way. However, you can use your stone axe in order to take the logs and turn them into planks. Each individual plank cannot be turned into a crafting bench, but using 4 planks will make a larger plank. Now, in order to make your first crafting bench, you are going to need 4 of these. You can make it out of any wood, it does not really matter. Now we have our first crafting bench. Now that we have our bench, we're going to take our clay and put it in to make our first molds, which we are going to use in our fire pit. Simply open up the fire pit and put the clay mold in. Add some fuel, and give it time. Now, if you will look at the actual item itself, you can watch the heat raise as it cooks. It goes from, there's actually many temperatures in the game that could make it so that the metals themselves can get to many different levels of heat. It goes from warming to hot, to very hot, to dark red, to to medium red, hot, light, bright red, dark orange, medium orange, light orange, and so on and so on. There are many levels of heat, and once something reaches the correct temperature, it will become cooked. This is important to know when you're dealing with something like metals, as they themselves will only melt at certain temperatures. Cassiterite itself, for example, will melt once it gets to a higher, very hot state. So once it's done warming and going through its hot stage, it will finally hit very hot again and will melt into the mold. Please note the damage bar, which is an indicator of how full the mold actually is. Until it completely fills up, it will not be able to be crafted into an ingot. Now, in your travels looking for materials, the ones that you can actually find on the ground are one of 4 various ones. While any ore that is on the surface set of rock can be found, only 4 are usually found. That would be bismuthinite, cassiterite, sphalerite, and copper. Please note the first 3 are the only ones that can be really used for your initial tools, as while you can construct copper into something, it is very difficult to get it up to the right temperatures. So usually you want to be looking for these 3 for your initial tools. Also note that they will melt at different temperatures and have a chance of evaporating if they get too hot. Sphalerite is especially very well known for that, as it will evaporate at a very low state. They turn into different materials as well. Bismuthite will turn into bismuth, cassiterite will turn into tin, and zinc, and sphalerite will turn into zinc. And while their initial tools that they make are not that strong, they are your first metals and are the only ways that you are going to get your first pick. While we're waiting for our materials to cook in the fire pit, it is worth covering some of the other basics of the game. This time we're going to be covering something like gravity. Now, while the various things that you know of in the game are affected by gravity, for instance, gravel and sand, in this mod, dirt can be added to that list, as well as cobble. Now, while they might be affected by gravity in which you might expect, they are not entirely normal. While cobble will fall from a height and simply tower down as such, dirt, sand, and gravel, on the other hand, cannot be piled on top of. They will fall to the side consistently. This works with dirt, sand, and sand. On the other hand, gravel can be stacked up, though still affected by initial gravity. It is also worth noting that dirt blocks themselves are not initially affected by gravity, whereas we can update all this and have all that dirt fall out. The grass that blocks themselves are not initially affected by gravity. On the other hand, walking on top of a dirt block that it has nothing underneath it can, in fact, cause the gravity to cause the dirt block to update and cause a cave-in effect. Your weight can trigger the mechanism and can lead to an untimely death. So it's worth knowing where your footing is held. While this can be slightly annoying, this is a very good way of finding initial caves in the game, as while caves are difficult to find, they can be found by simply looking for patches of the ground that have a cave in. For instance, right here you can see various patches of ground that are in somewhat lined shapes. These are patches of ground that are significant of where caves are most likely formed. If you were to dig into them, you will most likely unearth a cave underneath. And this is probably your easiest way of finding your first caves. There we go. Now that we have our first material cooked down, we can actually see about turning this into an ingot. Now, it is worth noting that we can't just go ahead and just craft it out of nothing. We are going to need an anvil. In order to make your first anvil, you are going to need a stone hammer. The stone hammer can be used on many different vanilla rock types. In this case, we're going to be using basalt. Now, normally what you would do is you would want to dig down to the layer of rock and right-click on it with your hammer in order to get this to happen. Please note that not all rock types will work for this. About half of them in the game are usable as anvils, but some are too soft to be used. But when you have a piece of stone that can be used, you simply right-click on the surface, then right-click on the top to open up your first anvil interface. In order to keep it as an anvil, you want to take your stone hammer and put it into the inventory. Now, we can take our ingot and put it into the top. But wait, it's in a liquid state, so thus cannot be hammered. So we want to take it and put it back in our inventory and allow it time to cool down. Now there is a way of making barrels in the game, which you can fill with water in order to cool down ingots faster. However, this is only really useful for when you want to be able to store your ingots, as they cool them down far too fast in order for you to actually take that ingot later on and be able to work it. As you can only work ingots at certain temperatures. Once they get too cool, they cannot be worked anymore. You can, of course, take your ingots if they have gotten too cool and put them back into your fire pit to heat them back up to a level where you can actually work them again. It is also worth noting that there are various areas in the game that are not affected by heat, and if you put an item in that inventory, they will remain at their temperature for long periods of time. Indefinitely, in fact. This is the right sides of a forge as well as any anvil. So if I take this and I leave it in the anvil, it will remain at that temperature indefinitely. And there you have it. Our ingot is now cool enough to be able to be worked, now that it no longer says the liquid state. Now if you put it in the anvil and look on the right side, you will see a set of rules. This is the rules that you need to do in order to get this ingot to be formed. If you notice the bottom here, you have an arrow pointing up that is green and a bracket pointing down which has a red dot in the center. Now ideally when you are creating tools, you want to be able to line up the green and the red in order to make your tool as strong as possible. But for an ingot, it does not benefit it at all, so we simply want to end up with a green inside the brackets. Now note that the rules on the right will move this arrow to the right, and the rules on the left will move it to the left. So if we simply take it and do this, and now we follow the rules here so it will end inside this bracket by using a hit, we now have our first ingot. So now that we have our first ingot, what can we do with it? As this is obviously not going to do a whole lot for digging into the ground. We still need a pick. But in order to make a pick, we need the plans for a pick, as many of the tools in the game are only creatable by having plans to use them with. In order to make plans, we need a scribing table. Scribing tables are constructed using a piece of paper, a feather, and some wood. So we are going to need ourselves some paper in order to continue with this conversation. Also, once we get to the scribing table together, we're going to need some ink in order to make the plans. So now we're going to have to go hunt a few squid. I'll be back with you in a moment when I have the materials together. And there you have it. Now that we have ourselves some paper, and we have ourselves some feathers, and we have ourselves some logs, or some planks, we can take the planks, put them in a bowl shape, put a piece of paper under it, and a feather, and you will get your first scribing table. Now this is a new GUI that is only in TFC. When you right click on it, you'll notice that it gives you a whole bunch of little blotches and a piece of paper to put it into. Now you can take the rest of your paper and put it in there, and it will stay there even when you leave the GUI. In order to make those splotches, we're going to need that ink. So we need the ink sac, make 16 markings per ink sac, and now we can actually construct our first plans. Now there are a lot of plans in the game to make everything from swords and maces to your picks and various tools. What we're going to need this time though is a pick, so we want to make the shape of a pick. Now we're going to take this over to our anvil, we're going to take our ingot, put it next to the plans, and now we have a new set of rules and a new location to bring it to. You notice it says draw, bend, punch, and it gives an order that it must be done. The punch must be last. So let's go ahead and attempt that right now while it's sitting right here. If we do draw, bend, punch, it's going to be this far away from the center point. This is a good way of pre-measuring to know where it's going to end up over here, so that when you construct it, it's going to be as good of a tool as possible. So it's going to move that far over. So we probably want to have our arrow start around here. So let's bring it over to that point. And now we will follow the rules. So if we go with draw, bend, punch, we have our first pickaxe head. Now, although, if you had noticed, the green arrow did not end up on the direct center, and thus the tool does start a little bit damaged. The closer you get it to the center when you actually finish the construction, the less damage it takes. And in fact, it is entirely possible to hit it directly on the center every single time and make a perfect tool head. Now that we have our first pick, we take the pick, put it in our crafting bench just like we did with the axe head, and we now have our first pick. We can now go to one of the spots where we found the materials before, dig down, and we should be able to find our first materials. But in order to make that a lot easier, we're also going to need a prospector's pick, because that is another one of the significant things that's in this mod. So one moment, and I will make a prospector's pick, and we will continue. Now, once you start finding a material on the ground that you want to be looking for, it is a good idea to be marking the positions that you are finding these in, so that you could use it to triangulate the location of this particular ore. For instance, this sphalerite, when I hit the rock, popped up right here. So I'm using a plank to mark its location. And I have been using planks to mark the locations in various spots. Right now we have one right here, one right here, one over here. And let's see what else we can spot. I'm going to keep hitting rocks around here and marking locations until I got a spot to start with. It is also a good idea when you find other ones to use a different color plank in order to make it so that you don't get the two mixed up. Now, while we are waiting for me to find an ore with a significant portion, in order to dig down and find the vein, it's time to look at one of the basics of the game. This time, we're going to look at inventory management. If you notice, when we open up this chest, it's actually a smaller area than you would get inside a normal chest in vanilla. This is because they wanted to make inventory management a little bit more interesting in this game. Now, we can also note that while we can put some items in... Well, now it is also worth noting, when you look at every item, it actually gives you a stat to the item. For instance, this one is heavy and small. Now, the one we're taking note of right now is the small, as not every item will fit into a chest. For instance, tools are too large to fit into an inventory, while chests themselves, oddly enough, do, since they don't seem to actually have a size. And while planks will go into an inventory, logs do not. The way you store logs in this game is actually somewhat more unique. Logs can actually be stored by holding down shift and right-clicking on the ground, creating a log pile. Now, a log pile, when opened up, will give you room to put 16 different logs. Once it is full up, you can then right-click again to add further room and go for as far as you want. Now, it is also worth noting that logs are one of the best ways of use scaffolding in the game, as they are not affected by gravity. They are also extremely helpful, as you can actually take these particular blocks, right-click on them from over top of them, and take your scaffolding back without needing to be underneath them to get back your items. Please note that even though I placed down one log, I got back 16. The only reason it is like this is because I'm in creative. Normally that is not how it happens. The next thing to note is how you would actually store things like your tools. In this case, we're going to look at, because they will not go into your inventory, as you can see. Well, most tools we will not. Some do, by the way, though. For instance, a prospector's pick is small enough to go in, so is a saw, but most items will not. For that, you will need a tool rack. A tool rack will take any tool and store it on it. This works for all those types of items. You can also store javelins and bows and such other things. It is also worth noting that even though this inventory is smaller, you can still double it by adding a second chest to it. And while ingots also are too big to store into chests, they can be stored similar to how you store the actual logs themselves by shift right-clicking on the ground, creating stacks of the item. Well, there you go. It seems we have found a good source for a copper vein. As you can see, we can look at all the points where I have marked around this area, and they seem to centralize around here. If you look, you have a few spots here and a few spots here. And it does concentrate pretty heavily right here, so it's probably on more towards this portion. I simply did not find that many rocks in the center here. So we will be digging down in this spot. Let's start with our shovel. Keep in mind that that dirt is still affected by gravity, so it will be falling down, and you're going to have to dig out a portion of it before we can get down to the rock. Now, the way the prospectors work is it will check an area around it that is 12 blocks away from it and give you an indication of a reading as to what ores are in the area. Most of the time when you click, it will say nothing of interest. And it will say that often. However, the closer you get to an ore, the more likely it's going to say something else. Now keep in mind that while it will give you false negatives, it will not give you false positives. If it says there's an ore, there is always going to be an ore. And it is very handy to be able to find ores this way, because knowing that it is always going to be no more than 12 blocks away means that you can use that to centralize where you think the ore could be. Now, it's worth noting as we dig down into this cave that it is entirely possible, due to gravity, that the cave can fall in on you at any time. Now, the less area that there is, the more area that the stone is surrounded by, the less likely it will happen. So that is why we are digging one by two areas straight down. And also, you always want to start from the top down. If you start digging down and working your way up, it is entirely possible to cause a cave-in. So always start by going from the top down, and it is less likely to cause a cave-in and get you suffocated. Now let's use the prospector's pick. Now keep in mind that you want to go to figure out the actual depth it is at. So you want to start from the top down and work your way up and work your way to it. So we found medium source right there. So there is possible. So starting from this point, as we get nothing at this level. Wait. Yes, we do. Starting from this point, we can know that somewhere from this point down, there is copper within 12 blocks of it. So let's mark this location. 1. With a torch. Okay, we have now dug down far enough. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it is most likely on this level. Now I dug down a little bit further so we can dig. That is going to be the top of the vein. We want to dig into the vein. Now using the prospector's pick again, we're actually getting no samples anymore. So we actually dug beyond where the vein is, probably most likely in that general direction. So we want to go back up and see when we start spotting that vein again. And right here, we're getting traces. So from this point over, we are getting traces of copper, so it is most likely 12 blocks in that direction. But we are at the correct level down here, so I'm going to go here and dig straight that way until we see what we can spot. Now, as we're digging along, you should be using your pro pick to actually define where things are. For instance, from here, we are getting traces. So that means from 12 blocks from this point, we will most likely find our copper. So let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. From this point, if you right-clicked again, you will be getting a very large sample. If we dig a little bit further, you'll find your material. Keep in mind that in TFC, the materials are significantly larger in their spawn size than they are in vanilla. You will not find 1, 2, 10, 20, but often dozens upon dozens of this material. And it will often supply you for a very large amount of time. This concludes our working with the metals for this particular intro. I will show you a few more things before we head out for the day, and so you guys can get off to enjoying TerrafirmaCrack with the complete knowledge of what is going on. The last thing we'll be looking at today is how to make leather. As you will recall, killing animals will get you leather in order to be able to craft items from. Usually each individual animal will give you a single piece of leather to work with. or a single piece of hide to be able to craft leather from. You usually want to collect enough to be able to make yourself some armor, so you want to kill about, usually want to be able to kill enough to be able to make yourself a full set, so about 12 of them is enough to do a full barrel's worth. But today we're only going to be working on a couple, so let's go ahead and make ourselves a few barrels in order to make ourselves some leather. The first thing you're going to need is lots and lots of planks. We have a few different planks here, so let's go ahead and put together some oak, sequoia, and white cedar barrels. Each individual barrel will actually create its own color, and it's actually somewhat helpful when you're trying to do this. So we might as well just make, make 3 different types, because each barrel is going to hold a different recipe inside of it. So let's make 1, 2, and 3. The next thing we're going to need is buckets in order to fill these up. So let's go ahead and make ourselves some buckets. Please note that vanilla buckets do not work the same in this game. So you need to craft them. Craft wooden buckets. Now let's come up to this shoreline and go ahead and fill these buckets up. Now the first barrel is going to have lime water in it. This is to work on the first piece of leather. So in order to make lime water, we need something that makes flux. For instance, marble. We're going to take this marble and we're going to create flux. Now you need to you might possibly have to go pretty far to find different materials. Check the wiki to find out which materials can make flux. Marble is one of the most common ones though. Let's go ahead and take our stone hammer back for the moment. And combine that with the marble to create flux. Now we're going to go into our inventory, put the flux in there, and put the wooden bucket to create lime water. This lime water we're going to put in the first barrel. Now take the raw hides and put them directly in there, and now while waiting for that to finish up, we got to go ahead and fill up the rest of the barrels. So let's go ahead and get some more buckets of water. While I'm dealing with filling up these barrels, let's discuss the last basics of the game: liquids. In this game, there's actually different properties to how the liquids actually function. Let's just get these in the proper locations. Water, for instance, can actually be finite. Wooden buckets, while able to pick up a portion of water and drop it, actually do not allow for source blocks to be dropped. If you take this one and move it out, it's actually not a source block of water, and will level out to be a much smaller area. In order to move around source blocks and materials in this game, it also does not work on lava. Obviously, a wooden bucket is not very good at moving around lava. If you want to move around source blocks of materials in this game, you need to craft the highest levels of materials into buckets. For instance, the red steel bucket can pick up a source block of water, and a blue steel bucket can pick up a source block of lava. That is the only way to be able to move around liquids in this game to be in their source block form, as moving around buckets of them does very little. Now back to the leather working. As you can see, the lime water has taken our hide and turned it into soaked hide. Soaked hide you take and you put into your crafting bench and use a knife on it, either stone or metal, and turn it into scraped hide. Scraped hide you will then take and put into the next one, which is just plain water. Put this in here and seal it up. Now finally, the last one is going to need a log put in it to make tannin solution. So we put 1 log in here and seal that and give that time. Once you have finished using your barrels and gotten it out of the lime water solution, soaked it in the water, and then soaked in the tannin solution, you will end up with strips of leather. To actually craft something with it, we want to take 1 piece of leather, put it in our crafting bench to create a crafting interface here. This is very similar to the napping recipe, except in here you can actually craft various pieces of materials. Right now, the only things you can make here are things like armor. In order to make the armor that we're looking for, let's go ahead and make us some pants. There we go. Now you can tell that I took the knife and we threw it out of our inventory. That's because when we craft stuff, it will drop the other item. Now if you do mess up and get an error into here, there is no way of undoing it, as you have already cut the material and thus the leather is lost. So make sure that you look up your recipes before you actually construct them. And there you have it. We now have a leather tunic and some leather chaps. This is going to conclude our tutorial for TerrafirmaCrack. This is just to make it so that when you guys are watching TerrafirmaCrack, you're going to have a general concept of what's going on. Now, this was only basics of basics, as there is a lot more involved in this game than what I told you about today. For instance, there is bloomeries for working materials much faster for the metals, forges for heating things up quicker. There is large amounts of farming, including meals, which will give you various potions effects in order to make them more interesting. Many more different types. Many more different types of trees, many more different types of metals, and many more, much more involved in this. So please feel free to watch and look up in the wiki as you discover stuff as you go along. As for right now, I will be continuing with my Day 2 coverage tomorrow. And hopefully you enjoy the Day 1 coverage that's being covered by all the other people that are creating videos. As for now, this is pakratt signing off. You guys have a good one.